that extra work that I put in of doing the dry fire practice, doing the pistol drills. Like I set my phone up outside and I put it on video mode, and I videoed myself in slow-mo drawing just to see how my reaction was and how I was doing and how I was bringing up the gun, if I was being in good form. Because like you said, like the form is probably what really helped me, right?
Yeah.
It's not just having the gun, but it's being able to use the tool that you have. And it's those things I feel that was just enough to help save me. And I'm sitting here now going, holy crap, what I have been telling people in all the safety training and education stuff that I've been doing for the last 15, 20 years, it actually paid off for myself this time.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer. SIG is a leading provider and manufacturer of firearms, electro-optics, ammunition, air guns, and suppressors. For over 250 years, Sig Sauer Inc. has evolved and thrived by blending American ingenuity, German engineering, and Swiss precision. Today, Sig Sauer is synonymous with industry-leading quality and innovation, which has made it the brand of choice amongst the U.S. military, the global defense community, law enforcement, competitive shooters, hunters, and responsible citizens. Sig Sauer is also a premier provider of elite firearms instruction and tactical training at the Sig Sauer Academy located in New Hampshire. For more information about Sig Sauer and its complete line of products, visit sigsauer.com.
You, sir, have a story to tell, and it's something that has not been shared, and there's a good reason for that. But the reason that we're sharing this, just so that everybody knows right off the bat, is not because you're seeking attention for yourself or glory or anything like that. Like, what we're talking about is lessons that you learned the hard way that could have been a much harder way that can actually save somebody else's life. And that's why we're doing this today. So where do you feel like this story starts for you?
Man, well, in the context of the story, let's go way back to when I found out I drew the tag in June of last year. I found out that I drew the tag, and I knew that if I drew the tag, I was like, okay, it's going to be Grizzly country. So I got to start doing my homework. And so once that happened, I'm like, I started buckling down, and I went into trying to prepare and research as much information or gather as much information as I could. So I started doing that. I had read some articles in the meantime about, which gun is best as far as bear protection and stuff like that. I own a 9mm pistol for everyday carry, but I was kind of curious to hear. And I eventually settled on a Glock Model 20 10mm, just for all the aspects of 15 in the mag and 1 in the chamber and the little bit extra oomph behind it and everything. So that's what I went with. But when I bought the gun, I only was able to get 1 box of ammo with it because, as you know.
Yeah, hard times for ammunition.
And even throughout the middle of the summer, I'd go into the sports store and I'd look and they'd have 1 or 2 boxes of the personal defense rounds for, $1.25 a pop. And I'm like, well, I'm not practicing with that. So throughout the whole summer, I really practiced and prepared as well as I could. And we can get into it later. But anyway, like I couldn't shoot at the range. I just had to dry fire practice. It's basically all I could do. So we end up getting there on a Friday night. It was later in September. Hunted Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Seeing a bunch of bear scat and everything along the area, got into elk.
What time of year is this?
This is late September.
Okay.
The attack happened on September 21st. So
okay.
it was a month-long season, and we just opted for limited entry unit archery. Might as well hit the peak of the rut or around the 18th as close as we could. Plus, my friend who came with me took off a week of work just to come with me as extra protection for me, basically. So if you don't have a friend that's willing to do that, you need to find another friend, because that's just fantastic. I didn't even ask. I was contemplating going solo, which really was a bad idea, but my job is flexible enough. I could have taken off 2 weeks and went and hunted the whole 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks or whatever, but he could only afford, he's like, I can give you a week. We'll leave on a Friday night, and we'll come home the next Sunday. And I'm like, hey, that works for me. 7 days, we should be able to get it done. So we, to skip past the elk hunting stuff that happened, we hunted Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Tuesday, we went into an area to look for some elk, couldn't find them. So we bailed on that area and drove up to a different area that was more like high country type stuff. But it was easily accessible by vehicles, but it's still high country type area. A lot of white bark pine.
White bark pine.
Yeah.
And why is white bark pine important given the context of this?
Because the grizzly bears really like eating their seeds, and
so that's a really important food for grizzlies going into the fall, is the nuts from white bark pine.
Yeah, and I had known that and everything, but we get into that area and immediately, we were going to make this big couple mile loop through this area, bugling into a bunch of basins, see if we could locate, some elk. And we're walking along this one basin, and we're in this white bark pine, and we bugle. And as we're sitting there listening quietly, we hear it rustling off in the distance, and we look, what was that? Oh, nothing. Well, then we walked down a little further towards kind of where that noise was, and we found the freshest pile of bear scat that we had seen the whole trip. And it's like, I wonder if that wasn't a bear. Holy crap. All right, time to get our heads on a swivel, see what's going on. And this was, that higher country, broken timber. It wasn't thick timber. It was little pockets of white bark pine you could see for a while, little pockets of spruce that were a little thicker, but it's not like we're going through thick timber. It was fairly open. Well, from there, we ended up going and I bet we made it another 3/4 of a mile or more through a loop in an area. Saw a few more signs of bear. Actually, a couple of spots where the white bark pine were scratched to hell, like big claw marks down the tree and stuff. And you go up and the boughs of the pines were busted. And we stopped and we're like, well, I wonder what was going on there. Was it like cub going up there and busting branches? And we just kind of logged it in our mind and whatever. But not far from there, I had just bugled into a basin, listened, didn't hear anything. And I look at the map and I say, well, let's walk around this other little area for, a couple 100 yards. And then there's another basin to bugle in over there. And if we don't hear anything, well, then we can pretty much work our way back to the truck. So we started working our way that way, had made it, I don't know, let's call it 200-300 yards. It wasn't very far from what I had originally bugled. And we were just coming to this small little opening with smaller spruce trees and then a thick bunch of spruce trees kind of out in front of us. And we're walking along, not really making much noise. And all of a sudden we just hear this huge rustle and snapping of branches in the trees in front of us. And it's just this monstrous roar. Like I can still hear it in my head type of roar that I'd never heard in the wild before. And both of us instantly yelled bear and stopped in our tracks. And the next thing I know, there is a grizzly coming out of the trees straight in front of me, straight at me. Like no hesitation, no coming out of the trees, looking around or anything, just straight out of the trees, straight at me. And now the whole rest of this all takes place in a matter of, second and a half.
But when it's happening, you enter a different dimension of time where things feel like they're going really slow.
Absolutely. I've had other instances in my life where things have gone in slow motion, but this was super slow motion. Yeah. This was different.
What a wonderful mechanism for survival that we have that ability. Like anytime that we're in some kind of a, horrific, violent wreck, things slow down so much that we're able to make lots of decisions really quickly. And I think that's a tremendous survival trait that people have.
Well, the amount of cognitive thoughts that you can have in that instance. Well, for example, so when we yelled bear, I instinctively drew my weapon off my chest rig. And so I'm standing there with my bow, at kind of like athletic pose, bow in my left hand, pistol in my right hand, and the bear comes out of the trees. So I, drop my bow and I pull up. Well, she's 1 or 2 strides out of the trees from what I remember. And I'm already thinking, maybe this is a bluff charge, put one at her feet to see if it'll turn her. And so I do that. And then, nope, she's still coming really, really fast. So I pull center mass and just start, shooting as fast as I can as she's coming at me. And I was backpedaling, but I wasn't consciously backpedaling. I didn't know I was backpedaling until I'd fallen on my ass. So there was the first shot that I didn't intentionally try and shoot at her. And then there were 7 more shots until I fall on my butt. And that's the 7th shot. When I fall on my butt, my left foot starts coming up in the air. And again, I'm consciously going, oh, your foot's coming up. Don't shoot your foot. Make sure you hit the bear. Boom. And right at that instance, while I was doing that, she is hitting on her front legs to take 1 more stride towards me, but decides to pivot and turn and run away. At the same time, as she runs away, I take 2 more shots as she's running away and then get up. Now, as she's doing this, my buddy who's with me the whole time we were hunting, he's just there for moral support and backup. He's got his bear spray in his hand and it's almost ready to deploy. Like he's got it where he's just like at any second he can take that little safety plug out of there and fire. So as soon as he sees bear, he takes the safety plug off or yells bear, he takes that off. And as soon as he sees the bear coming out of the trees, he pulls up and fires that. Well, there was enough of a breeze that day that in his words, it went out like a limp dick and came back in his face. Like it just went out about 4 feet and kind of blew down and curled back up and into his face and into him. And after I get up off my feet, I can smell the spray because it's kind of wafting around me. And man, I can't imagine how he was feeling. I caught just a hair of it. That stuff's nasty. But so once that didn't work, he drops his spray, pulls his sidearm off of his chest rig. He had the same chest rig I did, and gets off 2 shots, 1 shot right as she's at that point of stopping and turning, and then another one as she's turning. I ended up hitting her 3 times out of those 8 shots, and he hit her once out of his twice.
Okay.
And, it all in that, like, who killed the bear? The wardens were like, oh, Jared, we'll give it to you. And because with mine 2 hit kind of center mass that we could kind of tell when we did the necropsy, we didn't go terribly deep in there, but we could tell that 2 were kind of, chest center mass type of thing. And the other one grazed her right shoulder and broke her back femur on her right side.
Okay. That's helpful.
And the one that hit her right shoulder is one of them that was as I was backpedaling, because I can still see it in my mind's eye of when I was backpedaling and I'm shooting at this bear, I saw one of the bullets hit and seeing that wave of fur that you always you see in a kill shot or whatever. So I saw that as I'm like, okay, I'm hitting her as I'm backpedaling and shooting. But yeah, that was so to go back to once I fall on my butt and the bear turns away, we get up and we're yelling at the top of our lungs and trying to back up. We're backing up as quickly as we could without turning our back and running. And we backed up a good 100 yards or so and stopped and kind of looked through the trees. And I could see her sitting down on her haunches, just kind of like sitting there looking around. And I'm so tuned up and yelling and everything else like that, I actually pulled up my pistol and tried to take like a 100-yard pot shot just to scare her or something. And she just, gun goes off and she goes, what was that? Because 10 mil at 100 yards. Yeah, I'm going to hit it. Uh-huh. But then right after that, then she drops down on all fours and kind of walks back into the trees that she was at. And we start backpedaling up further because we didn't know, is she coming our way? What is she doing? And then I started hearing what turned out to be the death moan. But I wasn't sure. I've killed 2 black bears before, but neither of them did the death moan. So I had never heard that sound before. So I was like, I think she's doing the death moan, but we're not going to stick around and find out. And one other interesting conjecture is as we're backing up, I go, oh, my bow is still down there, because I dropped my bow to start shooting. And as soon as I backpedaled, and Jared's like, well, it's going to have to stay there. And I'm like, yep, yeah, I can buy another one. As my, as my decked out Matthews, like $2,000 worth of bow is just laying there in the Wyoming wilderness. But yeah, I can buy another one. So we got out of there. We had a mile hike back to the truck. I took some video on my phone of kind of explaining what happened, which I can share probably. And then had to help Jared with the bear spray in his face, like take his contacts out and wash his face off, which we found out later. Apparently somebody said that don't put water on pepper spray. It just makes it worse. I don't know. Jared couldn't tell. He's like, it didn't seem to make it worse, but it didn't seem to make it better either. So.
Yeah. Well, you don't want that stuff to get between a contact and your eye for sure.
Yeah, at least he's like, my face is burning, my eyes are burning. I'm like, do you have your contacts in? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, you need to take those out. And in hindsight, I should have taken them out. He took them out, and now he like, oh crap, I think I had it on my hands. So in hindsight, it's like, oh, sorry. Yeah, you probably did make that worse. But
wow,
we were still pretty tuned up. I mean, I don't think I really settled down into, normal mode until we were back at the truck, and it was a little while later. There was one point when I was falling on my butt, and I'm going down on my butt trying to one last shot at this bear as she's coming at me, that I felt this crazy feeling coming up in my body of fear. Like,
yeah,
I now know what fear is because right. I was this close to screaming like a little girl in absolute terror, being terrified. But as soon as she stopped and turned, that instantly went away. That feeling instantly went away. And then I was back in fight mode, basically, because the only thing I can assume of is I must have went into fight mode because I was conscious enough to stay on target and to execute what I was doing and not just freak out. And that's all instinct. So I don't feel I can take claim to that. It's not like I made that decision on my own. But
did you have the second magazine with you? Because you basically shot half the ammo you own, like during this 1.5 second time.
Yeah, I pulled my mag and I looked, and I'm like, I got 9 rounds left. My buddy had his, but I don't think I did.
Okay.
I can't remember. If I did, I had like half a mag because the whole weight issue started coming in. I'm like, geez, I don't want to carry. I'm already carrying a 2-pound gun around on my chest. So I don't carry another pound of mag with. And I thought 16 rounds with 2 of us. And Jared did carry some extra since he wasn't carrying a bow, but I don't remember.
Yeah. So when you fired that first shot that hit at her feet, how far away was she?
Turned out to be 17 yards away.
17 yards. So you got a lot of shots off really quickly. Those next 7 shots happened really fast. So where she turned, how close was she to you?
Ended up being 6 yards.
6 yards.
3 feet from where my bow was sitting.
That is incredibly fast shooting. Incredibly fast shooting. So those shots were all breaking inside of a second, for sure.
Yep. Yeah. So it was, I was just pulling the trigger as fast as I could. So maybe I wasn't as in control as I thought I was. Who knows where the other, my brother-in-law, who does some competition shooting for the guards, was like, you only hit her 3 out of 8 shots. And I'm like, yeah, I don't shoot a pistol all the time. But
yeah,
I don't know.
You practice, and that dry fire practice is so important, and it's free. It is free to dry fire as much as you want. All it costs you is your time.
I did a lot of like trying to get my gun out of the holster as quickly as I could. And then a lot of just this practice of bringing it up and aiming and acquiring the target and not necessarily trigger pulling. I wasn't dry firing until I got, this part down.
Right.
And then I started incorporating the dry fire. But yeah, you're right. It was free, and it certainly paid off.
What kind of chest harness did you end up using?
I got the marsupial gear, the bino harness, because I was kind of looking for a new bino harness anyway. So it gave me a great excuse to get a new one because I really like the front open feature. But we both got their soft front pistol holder that attaches to the MOLLE webbing on the bottom of the chest harness. Okay. My friend was using the T&K gear bino harness, and that marsupial gear one clicked on there just fine.
Okay.
So,
wow. How does this how does this experience make you feel about going back into a place that has grizzlies?
Well, I'm definitely I'm going moose hunting in British Columbia this fall, so I'm going back.
Yeah.
I don't know if the grizzlies there are as aggressive as they are, around Yellowstone, but and that'll be outfitted, of course.
Yeah.
But I've been asked, like, would I go back there? And I would go back and hunt some of those really good limited entry units, but probably with a guide, not solo, just because of the stupid wilderness law in Wyoming. Because that really hindered us too. We could only hunt in some of these areas, and the elk that were outside of the wilderness were kind of pocketed up in a couple of small groups. You were either in them or you weren't. It wasn't like there was just elk everywhere, which, that's a whole nother conversation. But I don't know. The other interesting fact about this is that when we went back in the next day with the wardens and did the whole necropsy on the animal, and they did their whole investigation of policing my brass and sketching the whole thing out and all that, is when we were working on that bear, we found she previously had been shot with a small caliber gun about 3 weeks to a month prior, up through her right hind quarter and into her guts.
Interesting.
And she was roughly 18 to 20 years old, the biologist said, and had one young of the year cub. So she had a hungry toddler. She was old and she was wounded. She was coming at me no matter what. It was a really, really rare scenario.
I want to know more about what happened, like when you called the wardens. You get back to cell service. You're obviously going to do the right thing and let somebody know what's happened. And it's not like as hunters, we know what this process looks like, and it's going to be different in every state. Yeah. But like, you did the right thing. The first thing you got to do is win the fight and save your own life, no matter what. But now you've got consequences to face for doing that. So how did that all go down?
So we had to get to where we could get cell service. And by the time that happened, it was getting dark, but we were able to, I called in, I wasn't sure what to call. So I just called the tips hotline. It was like, hey, can you get a hold of game warden? We had a bear interaction. The game warden ends up calling me, and he's like, all right, well, just to let you know, we have to open a criminal investigation with this. You have the right to protect your life, but we have to treat it as a criminal case.
Yep.
And I'm glad he said that to me over the phone at first, because I was about ready to punch him through the phone when he said that to me at the moment. I was so tuned up. I was like, really? You want to charge me with the crime and I just about died or got, tore up by a bear? I was, I was pretty angry. But now in hindsight, it's like in hindsight, when you think about it, it's reasonable because of the laws of this country. They have to go through that because it's a protected species.
Yes and no. I mean, with a lot of stuff, we're innocent until proven guilty. But you kill a grizzly bear or a wolf in certain places, like now you're guilty until proven innocent. So now's your time to prove that innocence. Did you feel like you needed to have a lawyer with you? Like, no, this is starting to get stressful.
Yeah. So at that point, it was kind of stressful. But then he's like, he goes, can you please tell me the story? And so I kind of told him the gist of it. And he goes, oh, wow. Yeah, that definitely sounds like, you were protecting your life. And he was really open with it. He didn't make me feel like I was doing anything wrong at any point. So that really helped. He was a great guy. And so he asked if we could meet the next morning and go through the interview process, and then to go back in and verify whether the bear was dead or not. Because at that point, I didn't know. I was like, I think I heard the death moan, but I don't know. And then he asked, is there a cub? Well, yeah, we're pretty sure there was at least one other bear there. So we assume it's a cub. And they're like, okay, we got to go and check, because we don't want a wounded bear out there for somebody else to stumble across.
Right.
And so we met with them the next morning, and it was the state game warden, a federal game warden, and a big game biologist. And yeah, they were incredibly great with the whole thing. They went through it and they're like, yep, we go through these all the time. They said, you guys are incredibly lucky. Usually we do these interviews in the hospital because somebody's been hurt, or injured already. And your weapons aren't going to be confiscated. Nothing is going to happen, unless it starts to look like, it wasn't self-defense, which you guys, they could kind of tell. We were like still doing the shakes a little bit, or still pretty wide-eyed, or we must have been, because they were very, very gracious about going through the whole thing. I mean, if it happened again, I wouldn't hesitate to call them. To put it that way, it's just like they were really good about it. I had my reservations at first, but I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to just walk away from this either. I got to do the right thing. And so we met the next morning. We each give our statement under a recording. And it's funny because if we could go back and get my statement, I said the bear came out of the trees at like 40 to 50 yards and maybe got as close as like 15 to 20 yards from me. And they're like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound too close. And my buddy looks at me, he's like, are you nuts? I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, that was way closer than that. I'm like, oh, well, it sure seemed further in my mind's eye, but it all happened so fast. I don't know. So then they're like, well, can you help take us back in there? We're like, sure. And so we drive up to the trailhead and we're like, can we, load our guns back up and everything? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. So I loaded my pistol back up, carried that. And my buddy Jared had brought a shotgun with, so he had that loaded plus his pistol. And then two of the wardens had dogs with, and then they were all loaded with their guns and shotguns and stuff. So once they were like, yeah, you can come back in there with us armed, I knew I wasn't under a normal investigation. Once you're suspected as a criminal, the police officers aren't going to be like, yeah, get your gun, let's go.
Yeah.
Like it was still, a federal investigation, and it still is. But they didn't treat me like anything. They were pretty cognizant of like, yes, this happens. Unfortunately, it happens, and we're glad you're okay. We have to do our due diligence to make sure that everything goes smoothly according to the law. So.
Yeah. So you're going in, you've got the guns, you've got the dogs. Everybody is probably on the highest level of alert, I would assume. I certainly would be, given that case, because you don't know whether this thing is dead or alive, and pretty much got to assume that it's still alive and now more aggressive than ever. Yeah.
So as we're walking in there, we saw some fresh tracks, bear tracks in the sand, and then we saw some fresh tracks in the snow. And I look and I'm like, wow, that must be is that a cub or is that one smaller? And it was a black bear track. And I was like, well, I don't know if I could tell the difference between a black bear and a grizzly bear. First time in grizzly country. I don't know. And he's like, oh yeah, there's black bears all over the hell around here. And then we saw one of those white bark pines that was all tore up and busted up. And I'm like, well, what happened there? And he's like, more than likely with black bears around here, and that grizzly bear didn't like it and chased it up the tree. And then they had a fight. So that's probably what was going on.
Gotcha.
But I had dropped a pin on my phone on OnX about where I thought the attack happened after we got out of there. And we were working our way in, and I'm like, I think it's just up over this next rise and kind of down in this other area. I mean, this looks a little different. I'm not quite sure. And the biologist is sitting there with his binocular, and he's like, dead bear. And I'm like, oh, we're there. Oops. Good thing we were all ready, because we walked right in to within 100 yards of where the attack happened. And I thought we still had a little bit further to go.
Sure.
Having only visited that place, that other time before. But he saw the dead bear, so then we looked around, no cub. We walk up, my bow was sitting there still in a little bit of snow, and the cub's paw prints are all around my snow where it came up and like sniffed my bow and everything. And then we never did see that cub, but the bear was laying there dead. She was stiff as a board. She definitely died the night before, or that day before, shortly after we had shot her. And so then they go through the process of like, where were you standing, and go through the whole investigation. As I was amazed by the detail. They had a metal detector, they had sketch pads, the biologist was taking tissue samples and all that, which was really, really cool to kind of see. And then I got to see the bear up close and take a few pictures and whatnot. But they go through the whole thing. And then as they're going through the necropsy and the bear, they're destroying it in the same process, because I asked probably maybe even one or too many times that I should have to ask if I could keep a part of the bear.
Sure.
Since I killed it, I'm like, can I have the skull? Like, no. Can I have a claw? No. Can I have some hair? No. And finally, the one word was like, gave me a pretty emphatic no in more or less terms to tell me to shut up and stop asking. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But they take shears and they bust up all the claws and leave him lay there. And then as we were leaving, they take his shotgun with slugs and blow a few rounds into the skull to destroy it. and then just leave it there. And
Wow.
The biologist said that, that cub would come back, eat on mom's carcass, and that would probably be that baby cub's last meal, because it would either get killed by another grizzly or starve to death.
Maybe, but
which is another thing of like why we don't need all these grizzly attacks.
yeah, I mean that's a maybe, but there's also an opportunity for that cub to survive because it's in the fall. It's not like it's a springtime cub that just came out of the den.
She was still lactating, so that cub was still sucking milk. But yeah, it's possible, but
the odds aren't good for that cub for sure.
No. So and then that was pretty much it. We walked out, and as we were hiking out, we were just having a great conversation. We got back to the trucks and sat down and all ate lunch together and talked about all kinds of stuff and switched cards and everything. And it's pretty interesting. My uncle is a outdoor photographer, has been in for years, almost retired. And as I was telling my side of the story in the morning, I say my name and everything. And after I get done, the biologist is like, "Hey, do you know?" And I look at him and I kind of smile. And it turns out my uncle had taken that wildlife biologist, or had been with that wildlife biologist on a lion hunt like 15 years prior, and done a whole big story and write up on him in, I think it was Outdoor Life or something like that. Okay. So they knew each other. So then, it's kind of like, it was, the investigation was as much of being able to be involved in just kind of I don't know how you'd want to say it. It wasn't like I was a criminal at all throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it was, I wouldn't hesitate, like I said, I wouldn't hesitate to do it again.
So your bear attack happened, like 3 weeks after mine. And you wrote to me then and said that it had happened, but you and I both agreed that we needed to let this investigation run its course before we did this podcast. Mm-hmm. And my situation was different and similar. Mine was a little tiny black bear. I killed it with a 10 mil as well. But I think mine was 7 or 8 yards away when it died also. And I mean, that stuff happens extremely quickly, but it doesn't feel fast when it's happening. It feels like it's very, very slow. And thank God for that mechanism that we have that can let us do that. How long did it take before you felt like you were sure enough in the clear from this investigation?
Well, it was at the time, like when we were packing up and leaving after lunch, we asked them, and they had given us a bunch of really good advice of like, hey, it's probably not a great idea, to show all these pictures on Facebook and, that you killed a grizzly bear and all that, more from the context of, anti-hunters just trying to ruin your life on social media, the way the world is now.
Right.
More from that context, but also because they're like, it still is an open investigation. Unfortunately, the federal warden, he's got to write up his report and do his due diligence, which he says takes months. And then he has to send it to one of the federal district court attorneys, or however that works. It goes up the chain federally. And then once the feds make their decision of whether to prosecute or not, then they send it to the state. And he told me, he's like, the state won't prosecute if the feds aren't going to prosecute. So it's been, it's February now. And I just checked in out of curiosity, and he had just talked with the federal attorney and was basically like, you don't have anything to worry about. They're not going to press any charges. This was pretty cut and dry. You clearly defended your life for as close as that bear got to you. Plus, we feel the bear wouldn't have turned if your buddy didn't get around in her as well.
So where did his shot impact?
Right behind the shoulder, broadside. So okay. double long, basically. It's pretty. Him and I could maybe get into a joking match of like who killed who killed what.
Yeah.
But because I got 2 in the chest cavity as well. Right. But his shot would be the shot where you would make if you were making a broadside kill shot on a bear or a deer or anything. Like it was right there. So more than likely, that's probably what, with her adrenaline and everything and the time it took her to go and then do the death moan, that minute and a half-ish, 2 minutes time period, pretty consistent with a double lung hit, not dying right away, but slowly dying, fairly quickly. So
yeah,
he was pretty adamant, even when we were sitting there at lunch that day. He's like, you guys have nothing to worry about. I highly doubt this is going to go anywhere. You'll probably never hear from us again. But if you want to wait and whatever and get a hold of me, please do. And I just did the cautious thing, because as a consultant myself, I do depositions and sometimes expert witness, where I'm sitting in court providing my expertise. And the last thing I need is my reputation slandered by people who don't understand on how I tried to save my life from a bear.
Besides it being the only box of ammo that you could find, what kind of bullets were you shooting?
They were I was able to buy 2 boxes of 180 grain full metal jackets like a week or 2 before we left. But what I was shooting were the Blazer, those cheaper, I think Blazer's Federal. Were they 200 grain full metal jackets? I think they're 200 grain full metal jackets. I could not find the 220 Buffalo Bore full metal jackets, but they were the 200 grain. And to that point, interestingly enough, in all the conversations we had with the wardens, we asked them, like, what do you carry? Like, what do you want? And the federal warden, who deals with these all the time, he carries his 9 with full metal jackets. Because his opinion is he wants to be as accurate as possible, not gauging on the extra penetration, because is it really a significant difference or not when it really counts? He feels that accuracy is going to count more than the penetration. And that was his opinion of it. And honestly, I agree with him. Like, I would much rather be able to put rounds on target rather than a big gun going all over the place. Because the state game warden he told me several times how impressed he was that I was actually able to stay on target as the bear's coming to me, because you have to aim downhill as the target's coming to you, and then with those bigger guns on how much they can kick. And most people will start shooting, it kicks, and then by the time they go to shoot again, they haven't tracked down far enough, so they're always just shooting over the back of the bear. And again, I don't know, I guess my practice helped me in that situation, because I was able to actually get those rounds under that bear as she was coming at me. So
well, and folks can't see it right now, but he's gesturing a little bit and holding his hands out as if you had a pistol in his hand. And your hand position, I can tell by doing that, is correct. And the way you're holding your arms up is correct for absorbing that recoil. I can shoot a 10 mil very, very accurately. And with a little bit of practice, anybody can. So it's really just a matter of form. Mm-hmm. On the subject of ammunition, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, there's some good options out there, and people really gravitate towards the Buffalo Bore, and with good reason. It's a really big bullet. It's a semi-wad cutter, which is excellent for both penetration and cutting arteries and breaking bones. One of the drawbacks of the Buffalo Bore is that you're actually not supposed to shoot them through a Glock. The way the barrel is rifled isn't. You're just not supposed to shoot a hard cast lead bullet through it. So there's some aftermarket barrels that you can do for the Glock.
That's good. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, you can fix it, and it just is what it is, I guess. But there's another ammo company called G9 out of Washington. And they actually developed this cartridge for the Finnish military who needed to defend against polar bears with 9 mils. and they make this really whiz bang ammo that has something like 40 inches of penetration with a 9 mil into a bear or ballistic gelatin of equivalent density. So that's pretty incredible. I ended up, I had 180 grain V Crown, which is a hollow point that expands but maintains its mass really well and does a lot of cutting. Again, my bear was small. It was a 150 pound bear ish. I didn't weigh it. But yours being even though that it was a sow, being 18 to 20 years old, that's a pretty big bear. Any idea how big she was?
They estimated at 250 to 275. She was a lot smaller than I thought. Obviously, coming at me in real time, I thought she was 400 or 500 pounds. But I even said that, I'm like, I feel like she's pretty big, like 400 or 500 pounds, because I've seen some bear. I've seen black bears, so I had a good idea. but I said, I'm fully aware of that I could be way off in that context. And still, I know plenty of men that are, 6 foot tall and 250, 275 pound guys. And it's like, I don't want you running at me at full speed either. So it's big enough.
Yeah, totally big enough. And bears are so much freaking stronger than people are. Like it's almost impossible to understand how strong animals like bears and mountain lions actually are. But people will see it. They'll be out in the woods and they'll see these giant logs and stumps that are either moved or completely ripped apart. And what's amazing to me is a bear's reward for ripping apart a stump is eating like a handful maybe of like ant larvae. Like that's their caloric reward for doing that. So not only are they incredibly strong, they're incredibly efficient with the calories they consume. Yeah. But it's just different. It's not like comparing it to a 270-pound guy. It's just not the same at all. They're so much more powerful, so much faster. Your bear was probably charging at around 8 yards per second, maybe a little bit faster. That tends to be the speed that these animals move at when they want to go for it. And that's fairly consistent with what you're saying. You're saying it took about 1.5 seconds. It started at this range, it ended at this range. You got this many shots off. What really impresses me, besides the fact that you prepared yourself for this, that upon becoming alert that your hand went to your pistol, and then you had 50% accuracy on your shooting. That's amazing. You got a lot of shots off very quickly for that level of accuracy, given that amount of stress. Man, I am so grateful that you decided to bring a gun, that you learned how to use it, and that you were able to use it effectively.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's, to the strength of the bear thing, I always think about how a bear of that size, you can see the YouTube videos of how even those full-size grizzlies, if they want to, can scale a tree. It's like, I'm an arborist, so I used to climb trees for a living. I know how hard it is to get my 170 pounds up a tree, and I can't do it that fast, and they're that strong. And then that grizzly, when we were looking at her and stuff, those front claws are every bit as big as my finger.
Right.
And it's just like, oh my gosh, they're huge. And then, when I was getting ready and going through all the information, listening, I believe you had a podcast on talking about some of this stuff a while ago, because that's one of the reasons I reached out to you, is because you had podcasts on talking about pistols and bear protection. Yeah. And then there were other podcasts I listened to that had the same thing. There was the Meat Eater did a YouTube video on, pistol or bear spray and everything. And I came down to the decision of this, like, my gun is going to be my number one option. The only time I'm going to pull my bear spray, which I had on my hip of my backpack, is if it's a situation where there's a bear that's curious in us, or we happen to stumble across it and it's, 50, 100 yards away and it's not a direct threat. But I knew that I needed to have that option of, if there's a direct threat from a bear, my pistol's going to be my number one option. I'm not going to mess around with, stinky spray. And thank God I didn't, because it didn't work out for Jared. And, it all he did was get pepper sprayed in the face. So.
Besides bringing a 10 mil, what advice do you have for people who are going to go hunt in grizzly country?
So I suppose this has been almost 20 years ago now. But I had somebody share with me the saying of, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I kind of grabbed onto that right away, because it makes a hell of a lot of sense. It's, if, in that mindset of, how you prepare and how you practice and how you operate in everyday life is how you're going to operate when it matters, and vice versa. And in my world of working in trees, and it's pretty high risk industry, when you're, high up in a tree and you're taking the top off and running a chainsaw and stuff, you don't have a margin for error. So you got to operate safely all the time. And that's how I approached going into this hunt. And that's how I approach most of my hunting, is I'm going to do as much homework on the front end, so it's easier when I'm actually hunting. And that's what I would say, if you're going into grizzly country, the chances of you getting attacked, we hit we hit the lottery. I should have bought a lottery ticket that day, because really, what are the chances that it's going to happen? It's getting more and more frequent, but I don't think it's, like I said, I'm still going to go into grizzly country. I don't have a problem, but I'm still going to practice and I'm going to prepare, because now I know that extra work that I put in of doing the dry fire practice, doing the pistol drills. Like I set my phone up outside and I put it on video mode, and I videoed myself in slow-mo drawing just to see how my reaction was and how I was doing and how I was bringing up the gun, if I was being in good form. Because like you said, like the form is probably what really helped me, right?
Yeah.
It's not just having the gun, but it's being able to use the tool that you have. And it's those things I feel that was just enough to help save me. And I'm sitting here now going, holy crap, what I have been telling people in all the safety training and education and stuff that I've been doing for the last 15, 20 years, it actually paid off for myself this time, because I practiced and prepared in a way that I needed to, and it paid off. Like the perfect practice makes perfect. Like I wasn't just out there shooting rounds into a water jug, or, just trying to hit a target. Like I was practicing for the exact scenario that happened. And I mean, there has to be some luck in there too, but luckily, like, it all came together and it worked out for me. And I got all my fingers and toes and not a scar on me from it. So I can really be thankful for that.
Luck favors the well-prepared. I'm sorry that cut your elk hunt short. That's a bummer.
I seriously contemplated for a while afterwards, calling Wyoming and asking for a refund.
Yeah.
And I even went so far in my mind of thinking, like, you know what? They owe me all my money back, because not only was it 5 years of preference point, but it was a special tag. So it was like $1,500 elk tag that I only got to hunt for 4 days on, because after the attack, my buddy was like, yeah, we're going home. I'm not hunting anymore. And the game wardens were like, oh, you guys could go back out, it'll be fine. And I'm kind of like, yeah, no, I think we're going to go home.
Yeah.
But I went so far as like, well, I think that this whole deal with the ESA and it's listed, not listed, and whatnot with bear, I think there is a strong argument for not only the state, but the federal government putting people in harm's way because they're not managing these bears the way that they should be.
Well, and they're limited. They're limited, even if they want to. The Endangered Species Act is so restrictive that it prevents biologists from being able to take action.
I think it's a public safety risk. I really think like they're walking a fine line to somebody finally maybe having the means of suing them, and that gets an attack of saying, hey, it's not safe for us to be out here because of these bears. And maybe I'm way off base, but I still feel that way. Like,
yeah, I mean, you've got ground to stand on, and this isn't a one-off. Like, multiple people are being attacked and killed every single year. And it seems to only be increasing in frequency and honestly in intensity as well. We were talking here at the Hunt Expo today about the gal in Ovando, Montana, who was killed inside of her tent. And people are really quick to blame her. They're like, well, the bear had already come once and they ran it off and she had food in the tent. Like, that bear ate her. Okay. It didn't eat her food. It ate her. It killed her.
I think it's easy for people to have that conjecture if they've actually been in that experience. And now, having been in that experience, if I was ever wavering on, biologists needing to manage all species across the landscape, bears, wolves, ducks, squirrels, you name it, like, I am full on board now, because I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology. I kind of know how the system works, enough to be dangerous, but like this whole stuff we've been going through with, all the anti-predator hunting type stuff, it's just, it's not helping. It's making it worse. And I don't know what else to say, but it's
And it doesn't make it better for the bears either.
No.
And I feel like that's where people's hearts are at. Like when bear hunting, was up to be banned in California, I brought up the example of what happened with mountain lions in California.
Yeah.
So after mountain lion hunting was banned, more mountain lions were killed in California than were killed before when mountain lion hunting was legal.
Yep.
And the reason is because now the lions were coming closer to people, conflict was increasing, but instead of the state making money from hunters going out there and adding that recreational value and the historic and traditional benefits of lion hunting, now the state has to pay somebody to go out and do it. And lions are worse off as a species, as a population in that state because hunting was banned. And the data is really clear on that. So I know where people's hearts are at.
Yep.
But they just have to look for examples to see if that's how it actually pays out. And it doesn't, it plays out very differently.
Your example reminded me of the bear that I killed, or we killed. The biologist was looking at it and everything. And then he interjected. He's like, you know what? I bet this is the same problem bear that we've had not too far away. I think it was a site maybe 10 miles away, that they've had issues with her coming into this area and they've had to scare away. So not only because they couldn't do anything there with her, she wasn't a problem bear enough yet for them to capture, relocate, or kill, then she was still around. But also to that, the locals that we bumped into in that unit and how much they hate bears is probably the reason why that bear had a small caliber wound in it from somebody who just hates bears, doesn't care, and had shot and wounded that bear and didn't report it. So you start, not only are you not getting the biologist to manage the population in a way that's going to be healthier for the animals, now you're getting, the fringe elements of society to start taking things into their own hands, the shoot, shovel, shut up type crowd that are just making it worse. And it's this whole conundrum of just things getting worse and worse and worse and worse versus hopefully they could be better if they, could be hunted and managed in a way that they're supposed to, that we could hopefully then keep them from having all these people interactions.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And that change is inevitable, but the result, I'm afraid, is going to be slow, and it's going to be a painful process for us to get there. It's going to take all these series of litigations. And, for those who don't know, what happens is an animal rights organization or a preservation organization will file a lawsuit against a state or a government agency. And then they use this thing called the EJA, the Equal Access to Justice Act, and they can get all of their lawyer fees paid back to them by the government. And this started out as like a whistleblower protection thing so that the government couldn't just outspend somebody in a lawsuit. But these groups make a tremendous amount of money by filing lawsuits, by applying for EJA, and then using that money to hire more attorneys so that they can file more lawsuits and make more money. It's a racket, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the animals. It's unfortunate for everybody that goes into the woods, and we've got to bring it to an end. Gosh, your story is thrilling, to be completely honest with you, and I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did for you. I'm sad that that cub probably died. I'm sad that sow had to die. But hey, she picked a fight and lost. And that's the way it goes. I'm glad you won.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on and being able to share this. This is the first time that I'm going to have it publicly with my name out there, other than any all friends and family that I've told. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm never going to, share any pictures online of the actual dead bear, but I don't have a problem telling the story because of, like we said at the beginning, I wanted to share this in the context of, go ahead, go out, hunt, but be as prepared as you can. And, you know, then hopefully things are going to work out a lot better rather than being unprepared. Because I think if you look into a lot of the other attacks that happen, people are pseudo prepared. Yeah, they have a gun with them or whatever, but they're not ready.
Right. Or it's in their pack, or a million things, but you did it right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't thank you enough for telling this story. And I hope that people take it seriously and understand that this is something that can happen to them. And if they're going to hunt in an area that has bears, whether it's black bears, grizzly bears, I don't care. If they don't want to get chewed on, they should bring a 10 mil with them.
Yeah. And practice, either get some, you know, pistol training or at least, you know, practice.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thanks, James.
So I found this old ad, and there's like dudes dressed up like construction workers, and a guy's got a jackhammer, and there's a crane, and, you know, they're moving all these big steel beams and stuff.
Aladdin Stanley Thermos. Stanley, the tough, all steel thermos bottle that's completely dependable.
They're showing this thermos like falling off this building and hitting all this other construction stuff.
And built to take a bounding year after year. Get the top one.
Oh, it lands in a wheelbarrow. The guy grabs it out of the wheelbarrow. Now he's going to pour himself a cup of coffee. I love these cheesy old ads. And most of the time, like, they're lying to us, right? That's most of what marketing used to be, was just like telling a lie, or at least telling a version of a lie that made you think that you needed this thing. But I'll tell you what, when it's cold out like it is right now, the only way to keep liquid and not freezing in your pack is by putting it in something that's insulated. So packing a thermos in the wintertime is really smart, whether it's for a hot beverage like coffee, or if you just want to bring some water with you, which is a really important thing if you're going to be out adventuring around in this snow that we've got all over the country. And I think you should be, because it's a great time of year to get out and about. You know, this is both a comfort and a safety thing. If you want to get something from Stanley, which I encourage you to do, you can use the discount code 6RANCH. That's the number 6 in the word ranch, and that'll get you 25% off of just about anything on their website. I encourage you to do that. They're great supporters of the show, and great supporters of this audience. And I love you guys. So stay warm out there. Have a nice warm drink, and make sure you're drinking it out of a Stanley product. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. Your support allows me to keep doing what I love, which is meeting incredible folks and sharing their stories with you. For more content and photos, follow the show on Instagram at 6Ranch Podcast, or me at 6Ranch Outfitters. This episode was produced by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the 6Ranch Podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. Tune in every Monday for a brand new episode of the 6Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.